This video is brought to you by viewers like you.
Hi, and welcome back to Pokemon Ecology.
Hi, and welcome back to yet another new series of Pokemon Ecology. For this series, we're focusing on Pokemon and human interactions. Today, I'm analyzing the Kanto and Hoenn Safari Zones and Sinnoh's Great Marsh, and their horrible cases of poor animal care and other issues. But other episodes may include how Hoenn's towns share the land with Aggron without losing everything, for example. Without further ado, let's get into things. Kanto's Safari Zone is pictured in the anime, and talked about in the games, as being a wide open plains or savanna full of Pokemon. Technically in the games, it's not, as the trees form a ring whose canopy closes, but that's a video game limit, not actual expression. Considering many Pokemon aren't found anywhere else in Kanto, one could assume that this habitat is artificially stocked. Getting into the Pokemon, Doduo seems to prefer hillier environments, being found on the nearby Cycling Road or many mountainous Johto routes. Rhyhorn almost exclusively lives in caves or harsh mountains. The savanna of the Safari Zone is a foreign habitat to them. According to Scarlet's Pokédex, they claim a 6-mile area as territory. This many this close together is a sure problem, especially being in such alien terrain. Chansey are particularly rare in the Safari Zone and the general Pokemon wild due to historic poaching issues. Nowadays, they've maintained this scarcity, and the Safari Zone likely stocks so few Chanseys to match the real feeling of being in the wild and finding them. Scyther prefer forested areas at the bases of mountains rather than the savanna that this is supposed to be. Moon's Dex entry actually confirms this, saying young Scyther live together deep in mountains. Kangaskhan exclusively live on mountains and in caves aside from the Safari Zone and Great Marsh, meaning they are absolutely in poor habitat conditions here. Hoenn Safari Zone changes drastically from the original games to the remakes. As I understand, they are different timelines entirely. In the originals, the Safari Zone maintained operation, but in the remakes, they were abandoned due to poor business but were reclaimed by a volunteer group. This results in a much smaller area and much rougher terrain. Both are forested, but the modern one has a lot more forest edge encroaching. I'll be judging both by the first games, but I might leave a note here and there. Doduo doesn't mind this Safari Zone as much. The main areas are a bit uneven, but the hill or mountain along the northern border ensures good habitat. In the second games, the mountain seems to have a lot more forest in the way, and Doduo populations may find that unfavorable. Gligar may not find this most favorable, depending on how the mountain's slope is. Gligar live along cliffs and in ravines. If the northern mountain is largely cliff face, then many other Pokemon don't find it favorable. If not, then Gligar is out of habitat, or at least isn't in good quality habitat. Stantler would prefer habitating atop the nearby mountain rather than at the bottom, but perhaps the hilly terrain within the grounds is sufficient, or maybe they come down for food left by caretakers. Miltank, a bit like Stantler, seems to prefer cliffside grasslands. Now we have a conflict of interest between the two. It's possible that different parts of the mountain have grasslands or forests to support one or the other, but for that to work, it would start getting out of the park's area, which is possible, but we might see these Pokemon start to enter nearby routes. Rhyhorn once again finds itself in habitat far too small for it. This is only found in the remake semi-abandoned Safari Zone, so these Rhyhorn may have a lot more area to roam. This mountain houses a lot of Pokemon, however, hopefully not too much for it. Frankly, it seems like Hoenn is doing great compared to Kanto's Safari Zone. On to the Great Marsh. It's a preserve just like Kanto and presumably Hoenn's, but here, as you'll see in an upcoming video, there's a lot more that needed protecting. However, some of them were not reached in time and are absent from Sinnoh as a whole. Regardless, the Great Marsh is supposed to, and does a decent job of, emulating the terrain of the Mirelands in the past. Gumi, Teddiursa, Petilil, and their evolution lines are all gone from the area. They were present in Legends Arceus, but now are found nowhere. Theoretically, they could take steps to introduce these Pokemon to the environment, starting with a protected area like the Great Marsh, but unfortunately, they've decided to introduce a number of foreign Pokemon. Paris would be on this list, but it's introduced after the National Dex is obtained, so it does come in. Tropius is only found in the Great Marsh. The habitat is similar to others, typically wet forested environments. Tropius could escape into Sinnoh and become an invasive species. I didn't mention this with the previous preserves because this is the only preserve where we know how the ecology used to be. We don't know if Chansey used to be in Kanto, but we do know that Tropius was not once in Sinnoh. Speaking of can escape, Hoothoot's line is not native to Sinnoh. They're found in the Great Marsh and a couple other locations. Considering that this is a bird, it may have simply flown out of the swamp. I have no certain evidence of this, but it is a possibility. Meryl live anywhere that has water, though it seems like they've struggled to spread around Sinnoh. It may be that they're stocked here and sometimes the trophy garden, and though some escape into the wild, they've struggled to settle in many presumably good environments. Wooper may have actually been recently placed in the Safari Zone, or are in a similar situation to Meryl. They're only found close to or in the marsh, so dispersal has either been slow or recent. I'm surprised they haven't spread to nearby Lake Valor, as it seems like good habitat for them, leading me to think that local wildlife actually slows or even halts the distribution. Carvana, believe it or not, aren't actually exclusively saltwater Pokémon. They're found in a freshwater river in Kalos. However, they're only ever found in areas with a lot of moving water, like the ocean or a river. The still water of the Great Marsh is not natural for them. Fortunately, its closed-off waterways mean that unless a great flood happens, Carvana is stuck here. Those are all the Pokemon that may have been introduced to Sinnoh. Tangela, the one up next, is the only native that prefers another habitat. All the rest after it are introduced by wardens. Tangela seems to prefer saltwater or beachside presence, but this area isn't far from the coast, though it's almost certainly not saltwater in the marsh. Gulpin seem to prefer street pollution over swampy habitat, being found often in skater parks and near large cities rather than any of the swampy areas we visited in the games. Kangaskhan would hate this habitat. They prefer drier, likely warmer habitation than this, especially considering they live on a tropical volcano. Execute are likely fine, though their eggs may get stuck in the mud. Overall, the Great Marsh horribly fails at its intended goal of preserving the native Pokemon. Sure, it has saved some vulnerable species, but many native Pokemon are extinct, and the site is actively introducing potentially invasive Pokemon. Ending with the Pokemon Zoo, I was initially going to address it using AZA guidelines, but it takes no genius to look at the ridiculous size of these enclosures and say that this is wrong. In smaller zoos in real life, indoor and outdoor enclosures will be used to allow for sufficient space for the animals. There are clearly no indoor habitats here at all. Additionally, enrichment must be given in some form, but none is present. This zoo is horrible and should be shut down. In Let's Go, the zoo is an open play area. This doesn't seem safe to me, but I don't know details on training and behaviors, and in this case, the people themselves will be some form of enrichment, though insufficient. And that was a list of the horrible situations in the Pokemon preserves, except for the Blueberry Academy, which I'll do at some point in its own video. Let me know what you all think in the comments, and massive shout out to my patrons. You guys really do make this possible, and have actually made this very video possible. Thank you so much.